Carl Edwards is expected to decline the offer to drive the number 5 car for Hendrick Motorsports during All-Star race practice, and it looks like NASCAR could be headed back to Canada for the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series in 2026. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show them those really quickly. We're going to start by talking about the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. As reported by Trey Ryan, aka NASCAR Insights, that according to him, that for the Truck Series race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, this was the 17th straight Truck Series race with no overtime. This is the second longest streak for the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, I believe, going all the way back to maybe like 1996 or 1997, when there really weren't overtimes in the Truck Series back in the day. Despite the fact that the Truck Series a few years ago was a series that had a lot of contact, a lot of overtime finishes, it seems like the Truck Series has been the cleanest series in recent years. There's a really good chance that possibly they're going to break that record of how the series has been going on. It's pretty impressive to see the Truck Series being the cleanest series currently at the moment. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Spire Motorsports. As Michael McDowell, of course, won the pole for the NASCAR Cup Series race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, this is the first Cup pole for Spire Motorsports in the history of their team in the NASCAR Cup Series. While Spire Motorsports hasn't had the overall race pace up to this point, they've been really fast on the speed charts. They've really been qualifying up front a lot of these races. They had multiple cars inside the top 10, of course, at Phoenix last week, and they continue to show impressive stuff. And we know Michael McDowell is a really good qualifier. So to see this team continue showing the really strong pace and speed, if they can just sustain that speed, I think this team could go to victory lane in the not-so-distant future. Nonetheless, congratulations Spire Motorsports on making history for their team, and congratulations to Michael McDowell on getting the team's first pole in the NASCAR Cup Series. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Wood Brothers. Now, we already made a review on the channel talking about the NASCAR Cup Series race in Las Vegas Motor Speedway, but the Wood Brothers, of course, were able to make history for themselves as they were able to win their 101st race in the NASCAR Cup Series with Josh Berry. This is the first time that the Wood Brothers have won a race at a track built after the 1970s. This is also the first time they've had consecutive seasons of winning races since 1986 and 1987, when Kyle Petty, of course, won the Richmond race in the spring of 1986, and he won the Cold Club 600 the next year in 1987. The Wood Brothers have been off to a really strong start in 2025, and it seems like the team, ever since they got rid of Harrison Byrne, they have showed a lot of improvement. The big question is, will they continue to have the sustained speed? That is going to be the question. But nonetheless, it's a really cool and awesome story to see the Wood Brothers back to victory lane. It's a very popular win for the series. Congratulations to Josh Berry and the Wood Brothers on being able to pick up the win. A well-deserved win for the Wood Brothers. Congratulations to Josh Berry on picking up the victory. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey Day. As of course, over the weekend, while you had the truck and Xfinity races going on, you also had the high limit race going on at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. The first night had been rained out due to rain and weather, so they had to put everything on Saturday night. The majority of the event, Darren Pittman had dominated the feature. Ty Gibbs also made the A-main feature as well, but unfortunately in the A-main feature, he flipped upside down multiple times, end over end. I know he crashed into A-main, but to make the A-main in your first ever high limit race is honestly really, really impressive. And then at the end of the race, Darren Pittman unfortunately had fuel issues, had an open red, and they brought all the cars down pit road to fuel it up. Corey Day would have the lead over Kyle Larson, and Kyle Larson would try everything he could to get by Corey Day, but it would not be enough, and coming out the final corner, Corey Day was able to pick up the win in the victory. We know that Corey Day still has a lot of work to be done on the stock car side of things, but you got to keep in mind he's only had 12 or 13 pavement starts at this point, so I think he's going to get better as time progresses and goes on. But there's nothing to deny here. He's a fantastic dirt racer, and he's going to be someone that's going to win a lot of dirt races for years to come. He's great in the high limit series, held off a hard-charging Kyle Larson. Congratulations to him on getting the win, a well-deserved win for Corey Day. Yes, I know Darren Pittman fans aren't going to be happy about that, but it's a well-earned win. Congratulations to him on winning the high limit race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Stephen Parsons. As it was announced Friday afternoon that Stephen Parsons will drive the 20 for Young's Motorsports this weekend at Homestead Miami Speedway. This, I believe, will be the first scheduled start for the number 20 truck in 2025, as I believe the number 20 truck is going to run around 10 to 15 races throughout the 2025 season. And Stephen Parsons is going to run this truck in a majority of those said races. Stephen Parsons is an underrated driver. While yes, he's kind of struggled a little bit in the truck series last year, Hendrick Motorsports, and of course they got that win taken away with Parker Kligerman earlier this year at Daytona. This team is a team that's interesting with Young's Motorsports, and it's a good team to work with. Though Young's Motorsports has struggled in trucks in recent years, I do think if anyone can really help the team grow, it is definitely Stephen Parsons. He's an underrated driver in my opinion, and he definitely can get the best out of equipment. So nonetheless, congratulations to Stephen Parsons on getting this opportunity with Young's, and I think it's a good opportunity. We'll see how he can do with Young's Motorsports this weekend at Homestead, as he'll make a lot of starts with the program in 2025. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Dasher Cash for Homestead Miami Speedway. As of course, this past weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, it was a qualifier event for the race at Homestead. The Ford, of course, the Dasher Cashers every single year around this time, and they had the qualifier event. And the four drivers that will be going for the first Dasher Cash will be Justin Allgaier, who won the Xfinity Series race, Jesse Love, Austin Hill, and Sam Mayer. Four of the best drivers so far throughout 2025, the four highest finishing drivers who, of course, we're going for. Eric Almirola did finish second, but he's not running this weekend as Justin Bonzador is going to be behind the wheel of that number 19 car this weekend. But I think you've got four drivers who have a really good chance and opportunity here to go to victory lane. And I think that this is going to be really fun to see how things work out between all four of these drivers. If you want my prediction, honestly, Austin Hill actually might be the favorite because he won the last time we were here. Plus, Austin Hill's been pretty good at Homestead Miami Speedway historically. And then, of course, top four finishing drivers of this race will qualify for the next race, which I believe Bristol maybe, or Martinsville if I'm not mistaken, which is, Martinsville thinks the second race, so we're not too far away from that. But all four of these guys will go for the Dasher Cash at Homestead. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Roulette. As it was announced on Friday that Ryan Roulette will make his NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series debut next weekend at Martinsville Speedway, driving number 67 truck for Freedom Racing Enterprises. This is the first, I believe, 3 scheduled starts he has with Freedom Racing Enterprises in the second truck. Ryan Roulette, of course, who serves in the military, also has made a lot of starts in ARCA. I believe he's making quite a few starts in the number 99 car for Michael Maples' organization, which should form for 2025. And I think this is a solid opportunity for Ryan Roulette. Now, Freedom Racing Enterprises, they actually have shown a little bit more speed in 2025. Spencer Boyd qualified a team around 20th position for the race in Las Vegas. And I think a lot of that does come down to Jeff Hammond being there, but also Mike Hillman Jr., I believe, is still with the program this year. And Mike Hillman Jr. is one of the most underrated crew chiefs in the NASCAR garage today. So I think Ryan Roulette's got a really solid chance and opportunity to be very, very competitive here. And I think he's going to do a fantastic and really good job. Well, I don't expect it to be a major threat and contender. It's a good opportunity for him nonetheless, and we'll see how he can do when we go to Martinsville next week and as he gets the opportunity with Freedom Racing Enterprises for a couple races this season. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Drivers Only broadcast. As it was announced on Friday night during the Truck Series race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway that the Drivers Only broadcast will be officially making its return in 2025 as the Drivers Only broadcast will be taking place at Homestead Miami Speedway on Friday night. So here's how the Drivers Only broadcast is going to go. In the booth, it's going to be Kevin Harvick, Joey Logano, and Brad Keselowski. And on pit road, it's going to be Austin Cindric and Carson Hocevar. The Drivers Only broadcast, of course, has been going on since around 2016, which I think they debuted that at Pocono. And they've brought it back for the Truck Series because, of course, the Xfinity Series is no longer around in 2025, as that is on the CW for this year. I think they've got a really solid lineup for this year's Drivers Only broadcast for Homestead. Kevin Harvick thinks he's going to be a decent play-by-play announcer. He's probably going to do much better than Jamie Little personally. And I think that Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski do from time to time do a really good job in the commentary booth, even though they're not amazing in the commentary booth at times, but I believe Brad Keselowski do probably a good job. And then you got Austin Cindric and Carson Hocevar. I think both those guys are going to do a very good job on pit road. Carson Hocevar is always fun to listen to, and he always asks the really tough and hard questions. questions, and I guarantee he's going to try to go ask Kyle Larson about how he runs the high line really, really good. But nonetheless, I think it's a really solid drivers-only broadcast lineup for the year, and I think it's probably going to be the best truck broadcast we do get for the Truck Series on Fox in 2025, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Australian Grand Prix. So before the NASCAR Cup Series race took place at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, you, of course, had the Australian Grand Prix, the Formula One opener from Melbourne. And this opener for Formula One was absolutely wild. Not even for the green flag drop, you had multiple cars binning it. You had Isaac Hadger, who spun during the formation lap hard into the outside wall and was very emotional after crashing out. Then when the race got back going, you had Jack Doohan, who crashed hard through the first few corners. And then he had another crash, being Carlos Sainz, who crashed on the final corner going into the final few corners of the lap because the track was really, really greasy. And then the race went green for a while. You didn't really have any incidents on track. And then you had rain start coming in at the end of this race. You had a lot of safety cars. Fernando Alonso crashed at one point. And then, of course, you had Liam Lawson who crashed out and Gabriel Bortoleto who crashed out of the event. The only rookie who had no trouble throughout the weekend was Kimi Antonelli, who actually got a really, really good finish. And then with a few laps to go, they got back green. And then it turned to actually a really good finish between Lando Norris and Max Verstappen. Lando Norris had dominated the race and Oscar Piastri had been up front, but Piastri had binned it, unfortunately, and was coming back from being 10th or 11th. He actually would recover, get some points by the end of the race, but he unfortunately had trouble after rain started coming on the track, and they waited way too long to come down pit road. And then it turned to a really good battle at the end between Lando Norris and Max Verstappen. In the final lap of the race, Verstappen was really closing in and was ready to make the move to get by Lando, but ran out of time. And coming out the final corner, Lando Norris wins an absolute thriller and picks up his first Formula One win of 2025. We all know Lando Norris going into this year, he is going to be the guy to beat, but he won an absolute thriller way. It was a really solid Formula One race, all things considered, because sometimes Formula One can be good. I guess you need rain on the track to make the racing really good in Formula One. But nonetheless, congratulations to Lando Norris on winning the race. I'm not sure if that's going to be how the season's going to go. I think that we're going to see McLaren dominate at China this week, but I think it's a pretty big win nonetheless for Lando Norris. Congratulations to him on winning the opener at Australia, a well-deserved and well-earned win for Lando Norris after dominating the event. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Josh Williams. Now, during the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, Josh Williams ended up hopping out of the car after stage 1, and Ty Dillon had to replace him at that point of the race and stay in the car for the remainder of the race. Now, Josh Williams, unfortunately, has been battling, I believe, an upper respiratory infection that's been going on since Circuit of the Americas and is not recovered at this point. He did write a thank you message to the fans on X, aka Twitter, basically thanking the fans for the sport, and he's hoping to feel better soon. For Josh, I really hope he does have a speedy recovery and does get back on the track this week. He does plan as of now to race at Homestead Miami Speedway, but if he doesn't feel good enough to race at Homestead, I would have to think that Ty Dillon nonetheless will probably be the driver once again behind the wheel, but I would not be surprised if we see Josh start the race at Homestead and then give up the seat to give it to Ty Dillon so he can feel at least a little bit better going forward, because I think that's one thing that really caused issues. There's a bump at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and when you're having lung issues and all that stuff and you're not feeling very good, it can be really not the most fun thing to do. So I really hope that he does feel better soon and hope we do get to see him back on the racetrack, because I want to see Josh Williams race. It seems like he's had a little more speed to start the year, but if you're not feeling very good, you can't perform at the best level. It seems like he's at least doing a little bit better. Hope we do get to see him on the racetrack once again really soon, because it's good to see Josh Williams on the track. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brandon Jones. As it was announced on Saturday after the NASCAR Xfinity Series race that Brandon Jones will drive the one truck for Tricon Garage this weekend at Homestead Miami Speedway. I believe this will be the first of around 6 or 7 starts that Brandon Jones has scheduled in the number 1 truck for this weekend. Now, Brandon Jones is, of course, running full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series for Joe Gibbs Racing, and he's actually performed really well over the course of the last couple of weeks. He, of course, got a top 10 finish finish at Las Vegas and finished third at Phoenix Raceway. And he's going down to the Truck Series, which I believe he has not raced in the Truck Series since 2022 or 2021 when he drove for Busch Motorsports. And he did get a win a few years ago at Pocono back in 2020. He's going to be in a very solid truck, as Tricon has showed some really good speed to start the year. Of course, Corey Heim has already picked up 2 wins this year in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. And I think Brandon Jones, with his experience, I think that's really going to play a major role in him being a major threat in series contender to go to victory lane. And I think he's got a really good opportunity to win here, even though you got to worry about Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson's running, of course, the number 7 for this upcoming weekend at Homestead, and Larson's going for the triple header and trying to win his first ever sweep because he's never won all 3 races in the same weekend. So that's the biggest threat that's going to affect Brandon Jones' chances of going to victory lane. But I do think he's got a really good opportunity here to get it done, and I think Brandon Jones will have a very fast car and will have the pace and speed to be a major threat in series contender to go to victory lane, because Tricon's been a fast organization as a whole, and I look for Brandon Jones to be a major factor in series contender to go ahead and pick up the win in the victory. So great opportunity. He's going to run a lot of races near the end of the year. Excited to see what he can do this upcoming weekend at Homestead Miami Speedway with Tricon Garage. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Travis Pastrana. Now, before we had all the cars on track for NASCAR, you had Travis Pastrana, who, of course, is at the High Limit event, going ahead and testing a sprint car. Now, originally, Cletus Farland was also supposed to test a sprint car, and they're working on trying to get the details out for him to go ahead and test a sprint car as well, but the car was not big enough for him to go ahead and test. Travis Pastrana did, however, and he tested a sprint car. From what I understand, he actually did a really good job behind the wheel of that sprint car. And something that he said to Kyle Larson as well, he says it's the most extreme thing that he's ever done in anything he has ever done before. Those are high praises coming from Travis Pastrana, who has jumped out of a jet with no parachute. He has done extreme things in motocross, things like Nitro Circus, among other things. And the fact of this, he says that this is the most extreme thing that he's ever done when it comes to motorsports, when it comes to all the chaos that he has done. I think that's, like I said, says really high praise about sprint car racing as a whole. And you've got to have a lot of balls, and you've got to have a lot of guts to go ahead and do things like racing in sprint cars. And Travis Pastrana, it sounds like, may get to do some stuff in High Limit at some point this year. And I really love to see him come out and do some High Limit events and come out and do some racing stuff, because he's ran the Daytona 500, but he hasn't really done sprint car racing before. He's done some late model stuff, I'm pretty sure, on dirt in the past. I think he did a late model race right before 2023. But I think it'd be really fun to see Travis Pastrana do some racing on the High Limit Series this year. And I think it's just an accomplishment that he's really praising this. And I think it's just an incredible deal to see him have the chance and opportunity to work with the High Limit Series, get an opportunity to test a sprint car. And it feels like, from what it sounds like, he really, really did enjoy it. And I think, like I said, it's massive and high praise coming from one of the best drivers in the world. He's done a lot of really crazy and wild things throughout his time and throughout like the last quarter century. So, because he's been involved in motorsports and all the craziness over the last 25 or 30 years, it seems like, at this point. And to see him praise the series and praise sprint car racing as a whole, I think that's pretty wild to see. But I think it's also really awesome to see him praise High Limit and sprint car racing, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the CW. Now, of course, they did update on the Atlanta situation where part of the race got cut off at Phoenix Raceway, and basically they did make the race available in the Atlanta area, I believe on the app or Peachtree area, but also for the Detroit area, because the Detroit area has been having major issues on getting stuff on the app. They have made the race available in that area on the app. Now, Jeff Gluck did respond to this, and he pretty much just says that the CW races all need to be going ahead and being available on the app. And here's one thing I gotta say. I completely agree with Jeff Gluck here. Now, from what some people have said, it sounds like they're working to resolve these issues, and it sounds like maybe by the end of the year, the races should potentially be available on the app, which personally I think that needs to happen. I do understand that the CW is new to the sporting side of things, and they're not fully used to having sports because they've just been getting into the game in regards to sports over the course of the last year or so. But they should have been prepared. They had nearly a year to get it up and stuff. enough, they announced this deal back in 2023, so it's not like it's something that they didn't know. They've had time to prepare. In fact, they even showed Xfinity Series races at the end of 2024, so they should have been prepared to have races on the app. If they had just announced this like maybe 6 months prior and they were not showing races at all till now, I would have completely understood. But we've had a lot of issues with parts of the country not being able to watch these races, and I feel like that is something that needs to be talked about, and it cannot be ignored. But again, from what people are saying, it does sound like they're working to resolve these problems and issues, which it needs to be resolved very, very soon, because you can't have parts of the country not being able to tune into your races, because it's just not a good look for the series as a whole. Again, though, they need to make it, because they make practice and qualifying available on the app, so how can you have the practice and qualifying sessions available but have the races not available? To me, that just doesn't make sense. It needs to be resolved soon. I hope it does get resolved soon, because like I said, a lot of areas of the country have been having major trouble, major issues of getting the races to be able to be watched because of stuff and affiliates. So I really hope this gets resolved really soon, because this is a major problem that they're having issues getting races in certain areas, and I really hope it is resolved quickly, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Toni Breidinger. Now, this is something that kind of went under the radar over the course of the last couple days, but it surfaced on Reddit. And this comes from an article in regards to Deb Williams. Now, she apparently did an interview not too long ago with Toni Breidinger, and Toni Breidinger revealed some very interesting information in regards to her Toyota deal and her signing with Tricon Garage. It says, quote, Toyota's deal does not go through the development program, but instead it does go through the marketing program, and they're looking at the sponsorship dollars and why they've gone ahead and signed Toni Breidinger over to Tricon Garage. That was something that I was really confused about when they announced the Toyota development drivers for 2025. I think they announced people, of course, like Corey Heim. They announced Brent Cruz. They announced Weston Workman. They announced Gretchen Wagner, I'm pretty sure. They announced Gio Rosario, and a couple other drivers were announced in the development program. Taylor Gray, and I believe William Swalch were also part of that as well. But one that I didn't see was Toni Breidinger, and I was wondering why she wasn't part of the development stuff. Well, it turns out they're looking at it through the marketing side of things. Now look, when it comes to stat, that doesn't surprise me or shock me. Toni Breidinger has a lot of followers on Instagram, and she has a lot of sponsors working with her. She, of course, is part of the Victoria's Secret family, and she also has sponsorship from Celsius, which is going to sponsor for 3 races this year, including this weekend at Homestead Miami Speedway. And, of course, Raising Cane's is sponsoring her for quite a few races in 2025 as well. Look, Toni Breidinger, if it wasn't for the fact she had sponsorship and funding, she probably wouldn't have that seat in the number 5 truck. And she has not been off to a good start in the truck series this year. And it's a shame, because I want to see her succeed. I want to see her do very, very good. But she just hasn't been doing very good so far in the truck series. Now, can she improve? Absolutely. But we were saying the same thing about Hailie Deegan, Ryan. We're all waiting for Hailie Deegan to make that major step forward and show improvement. And Hailie Deegan really never showed any improvement in the truck series. And then she moved up to Xfinity, and now she's no longer in NASCAR and currently is racing Indy Lights at the moment, Indy NXT. I'm really worried about Toni Breidinger's chances of being super competitive, and I just don't like that they went after the marketing side of things for Toni. I think that it's not like she's never succeeded in any motorsports before. I believe she's the winningest female driver in USAC history, and she's won a lot of USAC races, so it's not like Toni Breidinger hasn't done anything in motorsports before. It's just that it hasn't really worked out so far. Again, I really hope she can show improvement, because if it wasn't for the sponsorship dollars, because I think at some point the sponsorship dollars are going to go away, and sponsorship dollars can only do so much for you at this point. So she really needs to start cleaning up and do better on the racetrack, because she can't be qualifying near the back of the field every time, because she hasn't performed really that great, and she's been off to a very slow start this year, and I'm worried it's not going to get better, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, we do have a couple Kyle Busch stories to talk about first on the channel. But first, let's talk about Kyle Busch. As Kyle Busch, of course, was in the CW booth this past weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Now, why was Kyle Busch in the CW booth? Well, Park Clergerman, of course, was competing this past weekend in the 12 Hours of Sebring. It sounds like the team he was driving for, which had Big Machine Racing affiliation, it was the same team he drove in the Rolex 24. They unfortunately had some issues throughout the race and took themselves out of contention while they were showing good pace and speed throughout the 12 hours of Sebring. This will give Kyle Busch a chance and opportunity to be in the CW booth. And it sounds like, according to Kyle Busch, that he might want to do some more broadcasting with the CW other partners later this year in 2025. I got to say, Kyle Busch, for someone that has not been in the booth that much, the only time I think we've ever seen him in the booth on the NASCAR side of things was 2020 at Bristol during the COVID-19 pandemic. He sounded really good then, and I think he absolutely did a very, very good job. Well, there wasn't that chemistry all around between Park Clergyman, like we saw with Park Clergyman and Jamie McMurray to start the year. I think that Kyle Busch and Jamie McMurray still have some pretty solid chemistry, all things considered, and Kyle Busch just sounded like a natural. He knows what he's talking about. He, of course, is the winningest driver in NASCAR Xfinity Series history, and I think he should be doing more broadcasting. I think it'd be really cool because he actually got the opportunity to do broadcasting during the high limit race as well at the Las Vegas track, and he did a really good job with that as well. He just knows how to broadcast, and I think he did an absolute amazing and a very, very good job in the booth, and I really hope to see W. As much as I think Parker Clerman and Jamie McMurray do a really good job, I think it'd be really fun to have like a rotation of things where we do see maybe Parker Clerman, if he does have some more sports car racing and IMSA racing in the future. I would really love to see Kyle Busch come back and do some more broadcasting because he just did an incredible job in the booth. He sounded really good, he sounded super natural, and he sounded super, super clean as well. And to me, the best thing they could do is get him back in the booth at least for a couple races. I think it'd be fun to see it happen, and I really hope we do get to see the chance and opportunity for Kyle Busch to get back in the booth at some point in 2025. If it doesn't happen, it is what it is at this point. But again, he just did a fantastic and really good job, and I think that the best thing that they could do to make that booth even stronger, because the CW's had good broadcasts, but I think the booth would be stronger if they even had 4 people in the booth at one point, because I think Kyle Busch should do a good job. He did really good, and I hope we do get to see him have the chance and opportunity to be in the CW booth in the not-so-distant future, as I think he did an absolutely amazing and very good job. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Auto Club Speedway once again. Now, we've talked about Auto Club Speedway on the channel over the course of the last week because there's a lot of questions and uncertainties in regards to the future of Auto Club Speedway and whether this track is going to come back in the near future. Earlier this week, Dave Allen, who of course is the president of NASCAR on the West Coast, they said that they're still maybe hoping to have racing at Auto Club Speedway in the near future, but they're still in the holding phase at the moment, and they still don't know what the future of the track is going to be. Now, earlier today on Reddit, this got a lot of traction, but if you take a look at the photo that has surfaced in regards, there is a warehouse that is very, very close, and that, of course, is an Amazon warehouse that have been built up around the area. When you take a look at the photo, there is really not enough area, in my opinion, for a racetrack to be there. And from what it sounds like, if they are to even build a track at the short track in the first place, they would have to tear everything down, including the garages and probably even the grandstands at this point as well. And to me, when I do look at this photo, I really don't see a future for this track. It sounds like, because they got a lot of money out of it, right? And a lot of people are going to be disappointed by this, but they sold off, I believe, like 500 acres of land or something like that, and they got $569 million. They got a lot of money on that, and they can use that on street races. And there's a lot of talk currently at the moment right now. They're looking to have a race in San Diego in 2026, with the future of Chicago Street Course currently being uncertain after this year. And I do think Auto Club, because of this, will likely not have a race. And I think if we were to have a race at Auto Club, I do think the earliest that we could have a race at Auto Club Speedway, it may be as late as like 2027 or 2028. And I do think the lawsuit does play a major role in this, which we're going to talk about here in just a short little bit. But I think the future is very bleak. I think it's certainly very uncertain at the moment right now. And I do think that in regards to Auto Club, I don't really see a future for this track, to be honest with you. And I think it's very unlikely that we are going to be racing Auto Club Speedway. I think this track will probably get torn down, unfortunately, because as days goes on, the less likely we see a race there. I don't know if we're going to be seeing racing Auto Club Speedway in the near future, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Casey Mears and Mike Wallace. Now, earlier this week, it was announced that Casey Mears will be making his return to the NASCAR Cup Series for the first time at Martinsville Speedway next week, driving number 66 car for Garage 66, aka MBM Motorsports. When this was announced, Mike Wallace was not very happy about this. And Mike Wallace went on a rant saying, how come I wasn't approved to run the race at Daytona, but how come Casey Mears was approved to run at Martinsville Speedway? Well, a lot of people even responded to Mike Wallace on his Facebook page and pretty much said, Mike, the reason that Casey Mears was approved to run was because of the fact he didn't try to jump straight into running like a super speedway race. He wanted to run a short track. Now, Casey Mears did clarify the situation, and he basically says that he was not approved for tracks 1.5 miles or larger for the first time back at the track. He says if he does well enough and performs well enough, he will likely be approved for tracks 1.5 miles or bigger. He says that it's a bummer for Mike, but me and him are in the same situation. See, that's what it is. Casey Mears decided to go ahead and run a short track first. He didn't try to jump straight into running a super speedway like Daytona, considering that Casey Mears hasn't run a super speedway or a big track in 6 years. But even Casey Mears is younger than Mike, but that's not the point. The reason, like I said, that Casey Mears got approved over Mike Wallace is Mike Wallace, he tried to jump the gun and tried to jump all the way to racing at Daytona. Again, NASCAR looked at what happened with Derek Cope 3 or 4 years ago when Derek Cope was almost causing a big crash and incident, and they looked at that and they were like, yeah, let's not put someone like Mike Wallace, who is 66 years old at this point, who hasn't behind the wheel of a race car in 5 years, at least on a road course, hasn't raced in a Cup Series race in a decade on an oval. If he would have just gone ahead and jumped into like a smaller track, he would have been approved. And NASCAR even said they probably would have approved him. The problem is Mike Wallace tried to jump the gun. And again, I don't understand why he's trying to play pity at this point. Because Mike Wallace should have known better to not jump the gun. He did, unfortunately, and that put him in the tough position that unfortunately he's put himself in currently at the moment. I'm glad to see Casey Mears clarify the situation because, again, I think that Mike Wallace really jumped the gun at this point, and I really don't understand why Mike Wallace is really upset and mad about at this point. Because Mike Wallace, again, he's still going on about this months later. This is why we're still talking about this at this point. And to me, Mike Wallace really jumped the gun, and he should have absolutely tried to go for a short track, but instead, he wanted to race at Daytona, and NASCAR didn't want him to race at Daytona straight away, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Progressive. As it was reported earlier this evening by Adam Stern, that Progressive is in discussions to add a team deal to its advertising presence in NASCAR, with Joe Gibbs Racing pegged as a favorite to land the Ohio-based company at some point in 2025. They did not reveal which driver would likely be sponsored from Joe Gibbs Racing with the Progressive brand. But Progressive, of course, has been sponsoring NASCAR in some way, shape, or form for a while. You see those Progressive ads you see pretty much every single weekend on TV. And they, of course, used to sponsor RFK Racing when they were Roush back in like 2019 and 2020. I remember when they were sponsoring like Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Ryan Newman not too many years ago. And I even think they sponsored Chris Buescher even a few years ago as well. And now it looks like they're going to be getting back in the sport and sponsoring Joe Gibbs Racing. This is also a really huge deal because we talk about Joe Gibbs Racing and them losing and picking up sponsors. Obviously, this week they announced AMPM to sponsor Denny Hamlin for 2 races this year at Sonoma. And then, of course, I believe when they come back to Las Vegas the next time we are there. And then, of course, Denny Hamlin's picked up some other sponsors for this season. Of course, King's Hawaiian. But I would have to think Progressive is going to probably sponsor all 4 drivers except Chase Briscoe, who does have Bass Pro for the whole entire year. But I think that the most likely driver to pick up the Progressive sponsorship is probably going to be Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin still has a lot of races that he needs to fill for 2025 with FedEx no longer with the team this year. And I do think maybe even Ty Gibbs, who's been off to a rough start in 2025, I do think he also could have the chance and opportunity to getting sponsorship from Progressive as well. But I think this is a massive deal for Joe Gibbs Racing. They're a team, like I said, that has been struggling to pick up some sponsors in recent years. They've lost big companies like M&M's, they've lost FedEx, and they've lost other major brands in recent years as well. So to see that they are likely picking up the Progressive sponsorship for 2025, it is a pretty major deal for the team and organization. I think that's really important, right? Because you don't want to lose big sponsors. You want to be able to maybe, yeah, sure, you're going to lose some sponsors over time, but you don't want to have no opportunity to pick up and gain those sponsors. So to pick up a sponsor like Progressive and seeing them come back, like Red Bulls come back for Shane Van Gisbergen too on the Cup side, I think that's a big deal for him too. Unfortunately, they had a bad race at Vegas. But I think for Progressive, this is a really, really big deal. And again, very likely at this point, my prediction is right now, is that more than likely Progressive is going to sponsor Denny Hamlin, because again, Denny Hamlin, again, is still struggling for sponsors. There's still some questions how long Denny Hamlin's contract is with Joe Gibbs Racing. Some state that his contract currently does go through 2026. Some have said that he's a free agent currently at the moment, even though I think very likely he will stay with Joe Gibbs Racing, though he's been off to an up and down start this year. I don't see him really leaving the team currently at the moment. Nonetheless, I think it's still a pretty big deal that they're likely picking up a new sponsor, so I think sponsorship is very important in the NASCAR Cup Series. Glad to see he likely has picked up a new sponsor, and it seems like good for Joe Gibbs having a new sponsor for the year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports. Now, we did a video covering this story on the channel on Friday, but it was announced on Friday afternoon that 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports have filed their reply to NASCAR's appeal brief in regards to the injunction appeal that will take place. Now, the injunction appeal is supposed to take place on May the 9th. This, of course, is due to the preliminary injunction decision that was made at the end of last year for both 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports, so they could compete as charter teams for the 2025 season. The charters going for Bubba Wallace in the 23 car, Tyler Reddick in the 45, and Riley Herbst in the 35 for 2311, and of course for Zane Smith in the 38, Todd Gill in the 34, and of course Noah Gragson in the number 4 car. Now, they also in their response said that the plaintiffs needed to show that they were going to have irreparable harm, which of course there was some sponsorships that looked like they were maybe going to leave. Love's Travel Stop was looking to stop some of their sponsorship with Front Row Motorsports for the 2025 season. And also, of course, there was other big sponsors this year like Moneyline and Dr. Pepper that are no longer associated with 2311 Racing. While I do think that with Bubba Wallace maybe partnering up with Coca-Cola might have something to do that with the Dr. Pepper side of things, I do think that one big reason they left is because of the lawsuit going on. And also, of course, Monster Energy, they were looking to maybe back out their sponsorship had Tyler Reddick not signed. Had they not been granted their injunction for the season, there is a very good chance and possibility that every single driver for the team would have been looking for rides going into 2025. Bubba Wallace, Tyler Reddick, who all had charter agreements in their deals. Same with Riley Herbst. Same with Noah Gragson. Same with Zane Smith. And same with Todd Gillen. All of them had charter deals in their agreements, and they had to be signed with a charter team for 2025. That was why they went ahead and why Kenneth Bell went ahead and gave them the injunction and why they are competing right now as charter teams. Now, them replying will be good because that's huge for them that they went ahead and replied. And looking at it, I think 2311 Front Row have a really good case of winning their appeal. Now, NASCAR, of course, they're countersuing currently at the moment right now, both 2311 and Front Row on their side of things, and they're going to present their evidence, which it sounds like the countersuit is going to be taking place at the same time as the original antitrust suit, which I do think NASCAR does have some points in their antitrust claims and their countersuit, but at the same time, I don't agree with everything that they're stating currently at the moment. I still think the teams do have a really strong case to go ahead and win this lawsuit, which, again, NASCAR has said that if they do go ahead and lose the lawsuit, they may get rid of the charter agreement as a whole, which I think that'd be really bad for the sport as a whole. So we don't want that currently at the moment. Nonetheless, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in regards to NASCAR's antitrust side of things, and we'll see what happens with the preliminary injunction hearing. The judge, Kenneth Bell, can reverse the decision, but I'm not sure he is going to reverse the decision overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Katherine Legge and Daniel Suarez. Now, this was a pretty major story that was talked about over the last week in regards to the approval process, which we're going to talk about in just a short little bit. But a major story that broke was Katherine Legge's NASCAR Cup Series debut, and not in a very good way. So Katherine Legge, of course, is driving the number 78 car for Live Fast Motorsports. And she did get interviewed by Kelly Crandall in regards to the situation, and she said that she is embarrassed by her mistake that she made in regards to what happened with Daniel Suarez. She apparently had a call with Daniel Suarez, and they both had a really good discussion about what happened at Phoenix Raceway. Now, Daniel Suarez, of course, has responded to this situation, and basically he defended Katherine Legge and said it's not all Katherine Legge's fault on what happened at Phoenix Raceway. And he basically said that Katherine Legge got set up for failure, unfortunately, and she got put in a very difficult position in regards to what happened at Phoenix Raceway. So going back to the events, Katherine Legge was in the slowest car in the field. Live Fast Motorsports, no disrespect, they're a team that's not the fastest car in the field. She also had not made a stock car start in about 2 years. but that was on a road course. The last time she ran an oval for stock car was, of course, the 2025 ARCA race at Daytona, which she had to run to get approved for this event. And then, of course, she got crashed 5 laps in the event. And then, of course, the last race on the NASCAR side of things was 2018 at Richmond. She unfortunately cost Dale Jr. a shot at picking up the win and victory in that event. Katherine Legge is a very respected driver. Now, from how some fans reacted to her and responded to her, I didn't really agree with it. Look, I get being a little upset if you're like a Daniel Suarez fan about what happened, right? But I do think some of the responses and some of the reactions from the fans were really out of line. I think how Daniel Suarez handled the situation, I think, was a lot more mature. I think there have to be major questions about the approval process, again, which we're going to talk about here in just a short little bit, because I think you can question that. But Katherine Legge deserves to be back, and he even said that he wants to see her back in the field once again. And I think that shows that Daniel Suarez does have a lot of respect for Katherine Legge as a driver and as a person. And she did reach out to a lot of people, and she felt embarrassed about what happened. And again, I feel for her because she got put in a really bad position. And I'm not putting full blame on her. Because again, she doesn't have a lot of stock car experience. From what I understand, she also did not have a test, which I don't understand why she was not given a test. She probably should have been given a test like Helio Castroneves was. Helio Castroneves was given a test when we went to Talladega during the offseason, so he could get prepared for the Daytona 500. If she had a little bit of testing and more stock car experience, I think what happened here probably ends up getting aborted and doesn't really end up happening. We don't have the mistakes that happen here. To me, overall, I think it was just a really big critical situation, and I think it was a major misunderstanding, a major problem here that, again, I think a lot of it is on NASCAR to resolve these issues and problems when it comes to approval process, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. But to me, I feel bad for Katherine Legge. I think Daniel Suarez handled himself pretty well. We're not showing anger at her. He was just more angry about what happened in the situation. And I think NASCAR does need to work on the approval process, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR's approval process. So, over the last week or so, there has been a lot of talk about NASCAR's approval process on who's granted to run certain types of races and who's not granted to run certain races and certain types of tracks. And this has been a big conversation going on throughout the 2025 season. It started all the way back early in the year with Helio Castroneves being granted to run the Daytona 500, while Mike Wallace is not approved to run the Daytona 500, despite the fact that Mike Wallace had not run a race in a decade or so. But then you've had people like Kasey Kahne granted approval because Kasey Kahne has been racing active, and Casey Mears has also been racing active as well. But there's been a lot of talk and conversation around this approval process over the course of the last couple of weeks. And it all started over the weekend as drivers were asked questions in regards to NASCAR's approval process. And one person that was pretty outspoken about it was Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch says that the approval process is broken currently at the moment, and he says that people that are in suits should not be making the decisions. And he says that there needs to be a lot more driver input in regards to what drivers get to run and what drivers do not get to run. Shane Van Gisbergen, who of course made his NASCAR Cup Series debut at the Chicago Street Course, was asked the same question as well. Now he was able to get approved for the Chicago Street Course race. And he has said that he had to do a test. And Brett Bodine, who is one of the individuals, and Chad Little's the other one who makes a lot of decisions in regards to approval process, by the way. But Brett Bodine had to show him around at the Charlotte Roval to get him acclimated to be prepared for it. And also he got to have the opportunity to do a 30-lap test to see if he was ready to go, which Brett Bodine said, okay, you're good to go. We know you can drive a race car. And then the rest is history. Now he's a full-time driver in the NASCAR Cup Series. Now, Denny Hamlin also spoke on the situation as well. He said he feels really bad for Katherine Legge, and he said that it was a really bad situation. He really praised Katherine Legge. He even spoke to Kyle Larson about it too, saying it's pretty impressive that she's only a second off of us, and that she did a really good job despite the circumstances of what happened. And Kyle Larson said in regards to the approval process, there really isn't sprint car issues in regards to it, and there's not a major approval process for the sprint car drivers as well. One of the reasons there's been a lot of questions about the approval process is the inconsistencies. You got people like Casey Mears and Kasey Kahne who are being approved to run races currently at the moment, while Tommy Joe Martins, who just ran a full-time Xfinity season, 3 years ago, I'm pretty sure, he was going to run the race at, I believe, Charlotte for NBM Motorsports or Garage 66, and he's not approved to run it because he hasn't had a lot of success. I don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense to me, how you can only approve certain drivers and don't approve other drivers. And I think another thing that needs to be talked about isn't just the approval process, but I think one of the biggest issues and why there's been a lot of problems here is the lack of testing in practice. There's a major talking point going on right now about the lack of practice currently at the moment. And I think there are two things that need to happen that really can help a lot of drivers who don't have the experience behind the wheel of these types of cars. Number one, there needs to be more practice time. These teams, for most weeks except special occasions, only get 25 minutes of practice time every single week. I'm sorry, that is not enough, especially for a driver who is inexperienced. To me, you need to have at least 40 to 45 minutes of practice time, maybe even longer. Make a 1-hour practice session. That would be one thing that could really help a lot of these drivers get acclimated, because I feel like 25 minutes, I get that these teams don't want practice, but you need to give these teams the opportunity to get more practice. The other thing that needs to happen is testing. I've been saying this for a while. I think that there need to be tests, like how the Indy 500 does it. They have rookie orientation tests, and they have refresher courses. I think they should have refresher courses and rookie orientation tests for people that don't have experience in stock cars. We used to do that back in the day for Darlington. You had to basically, I believe, do rookie classes. They had to sit you down in a room and get drivers who had experience back in the day and let you do that test. I think that's how it should be. I think there needs to be more testing, because NASCAR really has put a ban on testing, which I think if you gave these drivers that don't have stock car experience some testing, I think this could resolve a lot of the issues, and you may not have the situation with Katherine Legge come up once again. I think that's what needs to happen at this point, is more testing and more practice. I think that would help with the approval process, and I think that's actually probably the way you get the approval process going, instead of just having people in a room making decisions. I think that's what needs to happen. So I think that's one of the biggest issues. We've got the approval process currently at the moment, and I think it needs to be resolved very, very soon. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about Canada. As it was reported by both Adam Stern and Jeff Gluck, that it looks like that we may be headed back to Canada for the NASCAR Xfinity Series and the Truck Series in 2026. According to both individuals, NASCAR is in intense negotiations to going back to Canada in 2026. This comes from a Quebec newspaper and a Quebec article that intense negotiations are going on currently at the moment. And it sounds like they may be headed back there in 2026 for the NASCAR Xfinity Series and Truck Series, followed by the NASCAR Cup Series going back there in 2027. Now, what track can NASCAR be headed back to? Well, it's one track that's very familiar from the mid to late 2000s all the way to the early 2010s, and that is Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. There were a couple years ago, we talked about this on the channel back in 2023, but NASCAR was looking to go international a few years ago, and the favorite track to pick up the international day for the first time for the Cup Series in about 65 years was Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. However, negotiations kind of fell through after it seemed like it was very likely going to happen for 2024, and it didn't end up happening. From what I understand, the Auto Club Day, which was going to go to Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, that ended up going to Iowa Speedway, which, of course, we're going to be going to Iowa Speedway once again in 2025. And Iowa, from what I understand, was also the backup for Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, which I'll say the Iowa race is actually really, really good. If this is true and Circuit Gilles Villeneuve is back on the schedule, I am going to be very, very happy. Because here's the thing about Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Montreal, this track always performed exceptional. The racing was amazing at this track. Every single year, the Xfinity Series would perform here, and it never disappointed. We all remember 2007, the chaos at the end. Robbie Gordon turning Marcus Ambrose. Then Marcus Ambrose getting Robbie Gordon back. Well, Robbie Gordon getting Marcus Ambrose back. And then, of course, Kevin Harvick winning with Robbie Gordon during a burnout. Then in 2008, Ron Fellows basically winning in a rain-shortened race after Marcus Ambrose sped on pit road. Then 2009, the iconic finish between Marcus Ambrose and Carl Edwards, where Marcus Ambrose made one mistake in the race and lost to the Carl Edwards. Then in 2010, the photo finish between Boris Said and Max Pappas. 2011, the chaos up front, where Marcus Ambrose finally got the win. And then in 2012, we saw Justin Allgaier win after Jacques Villeneuve ran out of gas on the white flag of the event. This track always put on amazing racing. We know how good the Xfinity Series is on road courses. But to see that the Cup Series will also likely be joining up in 2027, it would make a lot of sense when you really think about it, because if you take a look at the Mexico City side of things, I believe Mexico City's contract only goes for 2 years. And if they've only got a 2-year contract through 2026, even though they could extend it, they then can move that international date up to Canada for 2027 and have only one Cup International date, which I think maybe we only do one Cup International date would make a lot of sense. But I also think NASCAR wants to expand international very quickly, and they want to make the Cup Series have at least a couple international dates on the schedule. But I think the Cup Series going here, it would work wonders. I think that this track is perfect. It's like a street circuit, if you will. And we've actually seen some pretty good racing at the Chicago Street Course, not just on the Xfinity side of things, but the Cup side as well. But going back to Canada would be really huge. When I take a look at my analytics for my videos, the analytics for my videos on the Canada side of things, Canada is one of my more popular countries. And Canada has a major fan base, not just a major NASCAR culture, but it's got a massive racing culture as well. And what could happen here is you get some really big, bright international stars to come out of retirement, like Jacques Villeneuve, like Alex Tagliani, who I believe is doing racing, if I'm not mistaken, I think in the Euro Series, I'm pretty sure some other racing series. LP Dumoulin. Scott Steckley's kid, I believe, is racing. You could get people from the NASCAR Canada Series to come out and race. Trey Lapsevich, Caden Lapsevich, you name it. A lot of people could get the opportunity to run in Canada, and they would be favorites going into the event because of the experience they have at tracks like this. And I think that the series could put on a good show. Now, some are going to talk about Bowmanville and Canadian Tire, and while Canadian Tire is a really good track and the Truck Series did put on a really good show there, it's kind of out in the middle of the nowhere, unfortunately. And while it's kind of close to Toronto, it's not like in the city like Montreal is. And NASCAR would like to have more races in the city area. With Montreal being there, a built-in purpose track that's been there for almost like 40 or 50 years, I'm pretty sure at this point. The track always puts on amazing racing, and it's one of the best road course races. Now, everyone's going to say, do we take another road course away? That's certainly something that could happen for sure. But to me, I want to see this happen. I want to see Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. When you look at my schedule predictions, I always put this track on there because I want to see this track back on the schedule. I've been wanting this track to be back for like 7-8 years at this point. They haven't gone there since 2012. They left to go to Mid-Ohio in 2013 because they wanted to run the Cup race almost on the same weekend as Formula One, I'm pretty sure, and that did not end up happening. But I want to see this track back on the schedule. The racing was always really, really exciting, really fun, and it was really, really enjoyable. And to me, this track is a very, very good one, and it would put on really good racing with the next-gen car. So I hope it ends up happening, and I think especially how much better the road course racing has gone with the next-gen car, I think it would be amazing at this track, and I think this track absolutely 100% deserves to have another Cup date, and a Cup date for the first time. I hope we get to race in Canada, because we haven't raced in Canada for the Cup Series since 1958 when we raced at Toronto on the Exhibition Palace circuit. I hope we go to Canada in 2026 for Xfinity and trucks. And now we're going to head on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Carl Edwards once again. Now, we have talked a lot about Carl Edwards on the channel over the course of the last week. It was, of course, announced on Tuesday that Carl Edwards will be joining the Amazon Prime family, as he'll be joining as a pre- and post-race show host in the studio they're going to have, which will be at the track. He will join Daniel Trotta and Corey LaJoie there. We'll also join Dale Jr., Steve Letarte, and Adam Alexander as being part of the broadcast team as well. Then, of course, we had the Dale Jr. download surface with Carl Edwards, and it was one of the best Dale Jr. downloads I think we have ever seen. But one thing that's been asked about in regards to Carl Edwards, because this is a big question that's been coming up with Carl Edwards being back in the industry, and this is brought up during the NASCAR Hall of Fame ceremony. There's been a lot of questions whether Carl Edwards was going to get the chance and opportunity, if he wanted, to maybe drive the number 5 car for Hendrick Motorsports during All-Star Race practice. Kyle Larson, of course, is attempting to qualify for the Indy 500 for the second year in a row in the number 5 car, or the number 17 car for Arrow McLaren, with Hendrick Car sponsoring the car, and the car, I think, is going to look a little different this year compared to previous years. I think I've seen it. It does look really good, and it does look a little more blue from what I remember. But Kyle Larson did say, just like how Kevin Harvick got the chance and opportunity to drive that car during All-Star Race practice, Kyle Larson wants to see Carl Edwards get behind the wheel of that car. Now, Dale Jr. had asked Carl Edwards of this same question once again, and Carl Edwards, it sounds like, will be declining and will not be driving number 5 car for Hendrick Motorsports at All-Star Race practice. One reason that Carl Edwards said that he wasn't likely going to drive this car is, number one, he was going to get asked questions if he did really well on if I'm going to race once again. Are you going to get behind the wheel of the car once again? Or are you just not going to get back behind the wheel? Because if he's competitive, they're going to try to make a race for him. Then they're going to try to make another race, and they're going to try to get back behind the wheel for the season. Personally, I don't think a team would want to put Carl Edwards behind the wheel of a car for a lot of races because, number one, Carl Edwards is almost 50 years old at this point, and while Carl Edwards is still in shape, he wouldn't be super, super competitive. But I think that Dale Jr. even brought up a really good point here. He need, in my opinion, will need to have a little bit of experience behind the wheel of a next-gen car when it comes to broadcasting these because he hasn't been behind the wheel since we had the Gen 6 car in 2016. Now, that being said, I do understand why Carl Edwards doesn't want to get back behind the wheel. Carl Edwards probably isn't interested fully. And I know he's expressed interest in the past, right? As Denny Hamlin even offered him an opportunity a few years ago to get behind the wheel of one of his cars, but he said that the horsepower would have to increase for him to get back in. And right now, NASCAR, from what we know, unless they get the new hybrid stuff in and the torque sensor and all that stuff, it doesn't sound like NASCAR is planning to increase the horsepower anytime soon. So that's one thing that's making Carl Edwards not get behind the wheel once again. Also, Carl Edwards probably has some bad memories from what happened at Homestead at the end of 2016, so he probably doesn't want to get behind the wheel for that reason either. It is disappointing to see that Carl Edwards does not want to get behind the wheel of a car, but we also have to respect the decision. Like I said, Carl Edwards has not been behind the wheel of a race car in nearly a decade. And while, yes, it would be really good for Carl to get some experience and know how the next-gen car feels to show what it is on the broadcasting side, he's going to be able to learn this. And one thing that probably will be given an opportunity is he'll probably get behind the wheel of a simulator. From what we know, Carl Edwards has been doing some stuff with Toyota on the simulator front because I think 2011 Racing and Toyota and even Trackhouse have had him do some opportunities with the simulator stuff, which has seemed to help 2311 and Trackhouse in some ways, shapes, or forms. But I think that is where he'll probably get some experience there. But the simulator is not the same thing as real life. And I think that real life experience is very, very important. But I think it also makes sense why he doesn't want to do it too. And it's a shame to see, again, that he doesn't want to do it, doesn't want to get behind the wheel, but we got to respect it. Look, Carl Edwards had an amazing career in this sport. He did a fantastic job racing. He got like 28 career NASCAR Cup Series wins. He won 2 Crown Jewel events, the Coast 600, and of course he won the Southern 500 in 2015. He won Xfinity Series Championship in 2007. He finished runner-up a lot of years, tied for in 2005, finished third because Biffle had the tiebreaker because he had more wins than Carl, with Biffle's 6 wins and Carl's 4. 2008, he finished runner-up to Jimmy Johnson, despite winning 9 races. Jimmy just had a more consistent year in the playoffs. Then, of course, 2011, lost in the tiebreaker, was the most consistent driver, but Tony Stewart won 5 races compared to Carl Edwards' 1 victory. And then, of course, 2016 came up very close to picking up the championship and walked away at that point. And I think Carl Edwards is someone that, deserved to be in the Hall of Fame. Glad he got inducted in the NASCAR Hall of Fame because he absolutely earned getting inducted in the Hall of Fame. But he had overall just an amazing career in the sport. And it's just so cool to see after being gone for so long, he's back in the sport in some way, shape, or form. I think he's going to do an amazing job as a broadcaster. Now, one thing that I would love to see, and I think someone brought this up, why not bring something kind of like an adaptation to Wally's World, right? Back when NBC was in its peak back in the day. Get him do like the Amazon Cutaway car. Make him do a few races with the Amazon Cutaway car. Maybe get like a guest to get in the car. I think that'd be really, really cool. But I think, again, we have to respect the decision that he doesn't want to get behind the wheel of a car because he's probably going to get asked a lot of questions about that. Yes, I think the experience and the real world experience for someone who hasn't been behind the wheel in a long time, I think it makes a lot of sense to get that experience. But as of right now, Carl Edwards is not planning to drive a car at the moment right now. Would I love to see it for sure? 100%. But if Carl doesn't want to do it, we have to respect it. I'm glad to see Carl back in the sport, though, but it's a shame to see he doesn't want to drive the 5, but I understand he doesn't want to drive that car at All-Star Race practice. So, that is going to be for today's Lawn NASCAR News and Motorsports News episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go to more of that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are thoughts about Carl Edwards' comments on not getting behind the wheel of the number 5? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are thoughts about the other stories we talk about today on the channel, including the future of maybe going to Canada in 2026? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If any major news breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. If not, the next time you're going to see me will be on Tuesday when we'll be doing the entrance video for Homestead Miami Speedway. And we also will have the Truck Series race picks for Homestead. Then on Wednesday, we're going to have the Xfinity picks and also news video. Then, of course, on Thursday, I'll have the Cup picks for for Homestead, and of course the paint scheme video. And then of course on Friday we will have the video, a news video, and then of course we'll have probably reaction to some of the qualifying sessions, and we also should have the truck review coming out late that night with the drivers only broadcast going on. Saturday we have reactions to Cup qualifying, and also we will have reactions to the Xfinity race as well. We'll talk about people like Connor Zilisch, Shane Van Gisbergen, Cars, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Red Bull, Progressive, you name it, Denny Hamlin, Ross Chastain, Daniel Suarez, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, all the good stuff. Classic Farm, we'll talk about all that good stuff on the channel in the coming days. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.